Hello and welcome to another ATACMS Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra, where I give you all the juicy nuggets concerning the war in Ukraine and giving you some context and general information and points of interest that hopefully you might find fascinating or not. Your decision. Anyway, here we are, and I'm going to start with Humvees. Why? Because the US has promised a whole bunch more Humvees in their $275 million aid package that they have promised to Ukraine. So let's have a look at why Humvees are good, why they're useful. So back to this is a thread that I think sums it up pretty well. Back to armored Humvees and why they are great. The dismounting capability of four-door cars is superb. You can't imagine how it's important. MRAPs usually, so these are mine-resistant sort of APCs, usually have only one hatch and it's really high, making dismounting a dangerous op in body armor with a loadout. So when you're covered in gear, trying to get out of a small hatch is quite difficult, and you can end up getting into trouble and getting shot and killed. You need to be able to dismount really quickly. Four doors on quite a low vehicle is a benefit. Two, low profile of 2 meters is a great advantage. Hard to spot, hard to hit, stability at higher speeds, doesn't flip on to the side. And we saw that in an APC just on a video this morning. However, an advantage of higher profiles is that the gunner has a better view and aim. So it's armored well. No, it's not a tank or an infantry fighting vehicle still. Humvee is proven to withstand 14.5mm caliber rounds and protects against shrapnel, which is a big problem in this war. Mine protection is moderate but effective. So here you see, protection from mine. Yes, it's taken out and unusable, but the point is that it saved the people inside. Armament. The MK19 40mm automatic grenade launcher is an absolute beast. 40mm M433 HEDP grenades work great against trenches, fortified positions, and light armored vehicles up to IFVs. Also, it can be used for indirect fire. 0.5mm caliber machine gun on top of a Humvee provides mobile, flexible firepower. It allows to suppress and destroy lightly armored positions and destroy armor up to the BTR-82. TOW missiles, TOW missiles are Humvees with Humvees make them capable of taking out tanks from huge distances. The point is you can put a variety of things on top. 4x4 capabilities. The armored version has limitations due to its weight and fully loaded crew with a MK19. However, it still stays a capable vehicle. Tracked vehicles provide much better capabilities, though. With such armor, generally only tracked vehicles perform better in mud. So it's saying that, given the limitations compared to a tracked vehicle, this is still pretty useful, although occasionally can come a cropper. Sustainability. The main benefit of Humvee is that it's produced in huge quantities, and there is an abundance of spare parts and maintenance specialists in Ukraine. More than 250,000 have been produced. No other similar vehicle was produced in such quantities. It has a $150,000 to $200,000 tag for Ukraine. So this you might not think is important, but it's hugely important. The maintenance of vehicles break down, especially when they're under such high pressure in the war. And when you've got a supply chain that can easily help out Humvees, then that's a real bonus. Task and purpose, and the money is really important when compared to others, and we'll come to that, I think. Task and purpose: assault operations. Air assault forces utilize it with great success. Tank support operations, it was proven to be successful. Light artillery tow truck, M119 105mm guns. Medical evacuation has proven itself since 2014. Alternatives. Bushmaster has proven itself an excellent alternative. That's the Australian sort of alternative to this, is a kind of MRAP. However, the price tag is totally different. $1.5 million versus $0.2 million, $200,000. Please fill in here. Iveco and other alternatives are good, but consider price, low profile, and availability when comparing. So this guy is just saying that, Humvees, you hear about them a lot, they're used a lot, but that's because they are actually proven to be useful vehicles with quite a few advantages. Anyway, there you go. Geolocation. Geolocation is something that is talked about all the time. And there's so many OSINTs, open source intelligence people, just gathering this information on such a quick basis. and you can guarantee that at least the Ukrainians are using this to great effect, or at least to some effect. So here's an example. I was talking about Chervona Popivka being a place between, or just north of Kremina, that is being attacked by the Ukrainians. How do we know it's being attacked? Well, someone spotted on some drone footage that there's a Ukrainian vehicle, and then geolocated that vehicle. So what you do is you look for these landmarks and you say, okay, this straight thing across there, that oval, this thing, and you put these polygons on and straight lines, and then you map it onto a actual Google Maps or satellite imagery that allows you to geolocate this. So you say, I know the longitude and latitude of this vehicle, and here it is. It is here, and then you can say. So in this case, it's like we know that Ukrainians are around Chervona Popivka because here are some Ukrainian vehicles that we know that footage was taken today, and this is exactly in this position. But then you get other scenarios where it's like, okay, here's a road with a whole load of vehicles on it. I've geolocated it to this point. There you go, Ukraine. Do you want to go and have a pop at this? And so, yeah, the Ukrainian intelligence might have done that themselves, but I'm sure they're also scouring open source intelligence sources to look for information. October the 11th, I mean, this is from some time ago, just an example, shows a convoy of Russian military vehicles waiting along a road connecting Kherson with the pontoon ferry landing at Sadova area. Areas closer to the landing are too small and dangerous. Will the Ukraine army shell vehicles here next? Which is an invitation. It's like, here's some information for you. Go and have at it. I don't know, whether that actually happened, but this is just the importance of geolocation. I'm sure people in the threads can tell me much more about it as well. Okay, ATACMS. So you hear about HIMARS, you hear about these rockets that have sort of, or rocket launchers that have rockets that have an 84-kilometer range, and everyone's saying get ATACMS, which have like a 300-kilometer range. They're so important. Here's Michael Clark, who's a great analyst on Sky News. I really like him. He's talking about ATACMS in this answer. And he says that he's one of the people that believes that Ukraine already have ATACMS, just probably not very many, and being used maybe very sparingly. But he reckons that they have them already. Anyway, here's his answer to flesh out that point.
Yes. Just on the issue of international relations, I suppose then, America's to bring forward the delivery of dozens of highly accurate guided tactical nuclear weapons to Europe. And this is sort of being looked at as a kind of symptom, perhaps, an outworking of increasing, escalating tensions with Moscow. What always fascinates me about these things is that we probably attribute those labels to them, but how are they understood and how are they translated and therefore then acted upon among world leaders? We can comment on them and the escalating tensions, but actually, do moves like this, does it have a real impact in the real world?
Well, yes, it does in this case, because what's happening is that we are, from the very beginning of this conflict, we in the West have been crossing threshold after threshold in terms of what we're prepared to do to help Ukraine. And so to begin with, we gave them defensive weaponry, anti-tank weapons and so on, which were very effective in the early stages. And then when it was clear that Ukraine could do more than just lose slowly, we began to want to give them the sort of equipment they needed to conduct a counteroffensive. And the thing they really need now, I mean, they've got the HIMARS, which are the multiple rocket systems, which are very accurate and they're very, very good. But what they really need is heavy missiles, which have got these longer ranges of up to 200 miles and so on, such as the ATACMS, which I think you're referring to, which is the Army Tactical Missile. Now, I mean, some of us believe that the Ukrainians may already have a few of these, though nobody would admit it. And the Americans won't either confirm or deny that they've given them to Ukraine, but they've certainly given ATACMS missiles to Romania and Poland. And it's entirely plausible, it seems to me, that some of those missiles delivered to other allies have found their way to Ukraine. And I suspect more of them will. There may come a moment, a politically sensitive moment, when we admit that we are supplying Ukraine with these missiles, because the Russians will say this is a gross escalation. Well, it isn't. It's only equivalent to what they've got, and it's not a matter of what these weapons will do, but what the Ukrainians use them for. As long as they use them to try to recover their own territory inside Ukraine, there can be no argument. And the Ukrainians are, I think, bending over backwards to indicate that they would not use any weapons to target Russia directly.
Of course, there's this huge asymmetry here with Russia sending in cruise missiles right across Ukraine from inside of Russia and Belarus to hit civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, and then saying, the implication is you can't use anything to fire into Russia. So I think this idea that we can't escalate because we can't get them ATACMS and might use them to attack Russia is ridiculous. Like, Russia are firing stuff from inside their country into Ukraine, and even if you don't want Ukraine to fire back into Russia and they don't want to, I mean, it seems completely double standards to say that no, you can't give them a missile that can allow them to fire. Cruise missiles are devastating pieces. You see what's happened in Ukraine today, where they've been ravaged. Their electricity network has again been massively debilitated by a array of missiles and other ordnance hitting them in Ukraine. You think, what right do you have to say that this is escalation? It's not escalation. You are doing this.
Because that obviously would take the crisis into a different area.
So anyway, I thought that was just quite an interesting little snippet there to suggest where he thinks that there is very plausible that Ukraine already have ATACMS, and I'm just quite amazed at how far those USVs would have had to travel in order to get to Sevastopol to hit the ships that they did yesterday. Quite incredible. And, it's quite a distance from wherever they would have come from. But anyway, here's Kirill Budanov, the head and top man of Ukrainian intelligence, speaking in an extensive interview about the current military state of affairs in Ukraine, Putin's power, and the possible use of nuclear weapons by Russia. So just a nice synopsis of a few things he said. Putin is unlikely to survive this war, he says. Budanov said in an interview with military news website The War Zone. At the moment, there are talks in Russia about who should replace him, he added. The people of Russia will continue to support the government and its actions until Russia loses. Immediately, they will say that they have nothing to do with this and that their leaders were wrong. Is there a chance that an attempt will be made to oust Putin? Not now, but as soon as Russia suffers a defeat, it will happen quickly and Russia will change shape. Budanov does not know who, for the security of Ukraine, should come to power in Russia. Quote, I don't believe the Russians at all. I don't believe there is a good person behind Putin, but whoever comes to power will surely blame Putin for all the bad that has been done. So this is a really interesting point, the idea that if Putin's going to be replaced by someone, is there someone credible behind it? You might say someone like Navalny. Yes, definitely a liberal Westerner like myself would say Navalny's a great option compared to Putin. He wants to oust corrupt officials and wants to reform the whole government. But the reality is Putin will probably be replaced with someone broadly similar to Putin. But the question is, will they've got a choice of two actions. One, continue what Putin is doing, or two, say that Putin is completely wrong and go the other way. And surely the most rational decision would be the latter. There's no way, Putin would be ousted because Putin has lost this and is doing bad things, strategically bad things, not morally bad things, although he's doing that too, obvious. But anyone that replaces Putin would be just suicidal to continue on that same trajectory. So therefore, they would just blame Putin for everything, change things, even if they weren't wholly politically different from Putin. It would just be ridiculous not to make that kind of U-turn. The use of nuclear weapons, to continue this thread, the use of nuclear weapons was also discussed. Theoretically, it's possible that Russia will use nuclear weapons against us because Russia is a terrorist state with nuclear power. But that's just one possibility. We see no preparations for a nuclear attack now. Speaking of rumors that Ukraine would be preparing a dirty bomb consisting of conventional explosives and radioactive materials, he is clear. Quote, Ukraine has never produced such devices in history. It never planned anything like that. It didn't plan to, and it doesn't plan to. Budanov also spoke about the current military situation in Ukraine. According to him, the armed forces will be able to retake the city of Kherson by the end of November. The most trained, he says, the most trained and most capable Russian units are currently in Kherson. A large part of it consists of airborne troops of the Russian Federation, Russian Special Operations Troops, and the naval infantry, thus the most capable units that Russia has. These units form the backbone of the group and are also reinforced by the mobilized personnel. Budanov estimates that there are currently about 40,000 Russians around Kherson. We have enough troops to defend our state, he says. this is interesting. So the end of November is seems like a reasonable time to put on that, but in one sense, I'm just trying to work out what the intentions are. Like I said before on the previous video, it could be that they are trying to fix the Russian troops in position there uh, and do things elsewhere. Maybe do another counter in Zaporizhia. So if you've got the best troops fixed in Kherson Oblast and to the east of the Dnipro River, then they are unable to be used to defend elsewhere, and you really take advantage of that. So you might not want to completely take them out of the picture. That might be too costly for your own troops. This speaking from Ukraine's point of view. But by keeping them there, they are unable to be utilised elsewhere. Okay, here's another. This happens quite often. So the SBU intelligence has published an intercepted call where a Russian professional soldier, so professional soldier, is not a mobilised soldier, this is a contracted soldier, is telling his wife he's planning to terminate the contract after just 2 months in Ukraine. This is contrasting with usual Mobic complaints, as professionals are better trained and equipped. So let's see what he has to say.
Алло.
Роднуль, ты оборвался, командир просто подошел, палево было. Это
Господи.
Короче, мы тут домой нахуй собираемся, расторгаем
Кто
контракт.
мы-то?
Мы с пацанами так решили, короче, потом все расскажу домой, когда приеду, по телефону все не расскажешь. Короче, петля здесь нахуй начинается, вообще жесть нахуй. Народу положили, блядь, пиздец позавчера, блядь. Просто молодых пацанов, блядь, ни за что, блядь. Не знаю, когда. Короче, мы сегодня будем писать, нахуй, рапорта, нахуй, короче, о расторжении контракта, нахуй, в связи с несоблюдением условий, нахуй, армии российской, нахуй. Тут дохуя чего они, нахуй, косяки порят. Нехуй нам тут делать, это мы так решили. Мы, блядь, 2 месяца, нахуй, сука, за них тут воюем, они, нахуй, нам даже ни копейки еще, нахуй, не заплатили.
Haven't been paid for 2 months, troops dying, young lads fighting for nothing. So obviously there were bits of the call they're cut together, so that they're taking out some of the interchange. But the guy is just saying the idea that he knows that they're fighting for nothing means that must be fairly widespread. Well, I assume it's widespread. And it's true. I mean, we talk about this all the time. What are the Russians fighting for? Like on the ground, those people, those guys, especially that have been force mobilized. They're there. They're not there from their own free will. They're their own kind of will and volition. They're there because they're forced to be there. And some of these contract troops don't want to be there, or a lot of these contract troops don't want to be there. And they realise that they're there for nothing. There's no real reason beyond Putin's imperialistic narcissism, so on and so forth. So that's just a fascinating insight to the mind of a contracted soldier. Here's an example of, and if we take, I mean, this guy looks pretty upset, so I'd take his word for it. But this is the Russians, so he claims, killing 800,000 chickens in a liberated town.
Колоссальное просто количество птиц, и так по всем птичникам.
А сколько у вас было птицы?
Порядка 800 тысяч голов. 800 тысяч.
А осталось вся?
Вся.
Just, room upon room of dead chickens. Quite why? I don't know. Again, don't know all the information. Don't know all the facts about that. But if that is what it claims to be, which is Russians killing 800,000 chickens as a way of not allowing civilians to have eggs and chickens, that is a horrific civilian attack on civilian life, really, and the ability to feed themselves. There you go. We get on to the whole grain scenario. So there was this deal brokered by Turkey between Russia and Ukraine, whereby they are allowed to get their grain vessels out of the Black Sea. Now, Russia has said, no, you can't do that because you attacked us in Sevastopol. It's as if Russia can dictate to Ukraine. It's just everything about the Russian position is just so wrong. Just you could pick apart. Like if I was sitting down arguing with Putin about the rights he's got to make these decisions, do these things, he just wouldn't have a rational leg to stand on. Anyway, at this moment, 12 grain vessels are heading from Odessa to Istanbul, Turkey. There are no reports of Russian interference, which shows they have no control over the Black Sea. So this is really interesting. If Turkey wants to allow it, Russia will shut down. Barking dogs don't bite. Well done, Turkey and the UN. There's a couple of things to note here. Russia can say, yeah, we're gonna rescind this grain deal, but here's an interesting infographic. These are the Turkish and subs and surface ships in the Black Sea compared to the Russians, right? And so if Turkey wants this grain corridor to work, then actually the Russians are on the back foot. And you got the UN involved. So I saw a comment here saying, do you know what? If the UN have got involved, Russia must be in a really weak position because the UN are pretty cautious and they generally don't do stuff like that. But the UN are getting involved and possibly putting, there's different theories flying around about putting UN markings on ships and stuff like that. But just a fascinating bit of geopolitical back and forth here. But I think the whole thing shows that Russia just hasn't got a lot left in its tank as far or not. It's a barking dog, but it's ineffective. It can't bite. What can it do here? So I think that's really interesting. Now, of course, the Navy outside the Black Sea is a different matter. But then, what right do they have to dictate what ports and where boats go around or ships go around the world? It starts getting much more international then. Anyway, moving off the grain, something to keep our eyes on. Let's go to these cruise missiles and the attacks this morning, which there were so many missile attacks on Ukraine, but a good number of them did get shot down, which is great news. Although it only takes a few to get through to cause a lot of trouble. But here's some example. I think this is in the Kyiv area of a couple of missiles meeting their ends prematurely. So that's a pretty speedy cruise missile by the looks of it. Bosh. So yeah, there you go. It looks like a couple of cruise missiles got taken out. And as Tim White reports here, as the spokesman for Odessa region points out, Russia has in one morning spent around $500 million on missiles to attack Ukraine's people. That's the annual budget of a city. 18 power facilities have known to be hit. Plenty of missiles were shot down. The amount of money Russia is spending on conducting this attack on the civilian population of Ukraine is phenomenal. And then we have this interesting trail in the air that shows there's also talk of a number of missiles misfiring this morning. And here's an example of one that you can see still in motion, as far as I can work out. It's basically done a complete U-turn to start going the other way. So it's obviously having some maintenance issues there. We probably won't ever know how many of Russia's missiles misfired, but this one filmed from Mykolaiv certainly did it. It unilaterally decided not to be a part of the war crimes. And indeed, one has landed on Moldova. Sorry, it's just now refreshed randomly. So this again shows, well, I don't know that Moldova are particularly in a great position to do much about this, but I guess what are the ramifications of an errant missile landing in a foreign country, even if accidentally? I don't know. There you go. I also want to throw in a couple of points about air defence here, which is the IRIS-T system today. Apparently, we know it's provided by Germany, and this is pretty amazing system of air defence. Apparently, it worked with 100% results today. I said the other day it's 9 out of 10, and today it's 100% results. It's exactly the sort of system that Ukraine needs. Obviously, they just need lots of them. But again, the asymmetry between this being very expensive and things they're shooting down now, although the cruise missiles are expensive bits of kit. Today wasn't about the Iranian drones. It's about a whole bunch of missiles being sent across, and the fact that someone was saying just quite how much money that it did cost to send across, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But as well, Italy and France, I talked about this the other day, have agreed to supply the SAMP-T air defense system, and it's one of the best air defense systems in the world. It can hold up to 48 Aster 15 or Aster 30 missiles with a speed of Mach 3 to Mach 4.5, an altitude of up to 20 kilometers, and a maximum range of 30 to 120 kilometers. So that is a really useful bit of kit, and will be very much appreciated by the Ukrainians for sure. So moving on, I talked about this in the map update this morning. These are these mines that are fired out through cluster rockets. You fire these rockets and then they drop a bunch of these mines, and these are being used around particularly the Svatova area. Here, Trent Telenko says these are the German government's biggest military contribution to Ukraine's war with Russia. By biggest, he means having the most significant military effect. So according to Russian sources, Ukraine is carrying out remote mining of the outskirts of Svatova settlement using cluster rockets filled with AT-2 anti-tank mines fired from Mars to MLRS, so multiple rocket launch systems. Now Defmon says, now when we are entering mud season, remote delivered anti-tank mines like this AT-2 mine deployed with M70 could make a huge difference. If the enemy has to rely on roads due to mud, these could be used to stop reinforcements during an offensive. So let's just think about that for a second. If these are being used around Svatova and they can be sent out by these multiple rocket launch systems which have a pretty decent range, then let's look at Svatova particularly and say, okay, so we know that the Ukrainians are attacking to the north and attacking to the south. So if they cut this highway and they cut this highway, then if you're trying to get out of Svatova, or if you're trying to reinforce Svatova, you need to come in through this road and this road. And with the growing mud from the regional mud season, then getting through any other way is going to be particularly difficult. You are going to really rely on the roads only. So then what Ukraine can do is just litter this whole area here on this road and litter this whole area with remote mines. Just send up all these cluster rockets with remote mines, which they've got a bunch from Germany, as I've said. And this then means that it would take days and days and days for the Russians to navigate this road, to clear the mines, to get in or to get out. So not only does it stop reinforcements coming in, but it also blocks people from leaving, and therefore you can do like a really effective encirclement. So these remote mines could be used. That's just off the top of my head, a way of using them here, and it depends upon access north and south. But then you could do the same here and there. These could be really effective pieces of kit, and this is exactly what Trent Telenko says, which is these are the German government's biggest military contribution, and given that they are the third biggest contributor and are now coming up with the goods with a lot of stuff, Panzerhaubitze 2000s. Although it's interesting that Panzerhaubitze 2000s has been shown to have some sort of issues maybe in the design of it. The barrels seem to need replacing and working on quite a bit, so they're being sent back to Lithuania as one place that's agreed to fix 12 of them, and you're starting to see these Panzer howitzers turn up on the field again, particularly around Bakhmut. But so it could be that this is a bit of a masterstroke from Germany. So I'm going to split this video into two because I've got too much content. So there'll be a part 2 coming out later today. But just before I finish this part 1, let's just have a look at Bakhmut. And it's worth reminding ourselves what war means in terms of human loss, obviously, in terms of ecological and animal loss, but also in terms of cultural loss and the loss of place. So this is Bakhmut. Yes, we keep using that name, but what is Bakhmut? Bakhmut is a place where people used to live, and some people are still trying to cling on. But look at it now. What does war do to it? And what will have to happen to make this place Bakhmut again? you know, in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? Is it a case of, goodness me, just having to just clear it all off the table and start again? Here is a video just showing you, this is just a small insight into Bakhmut, driving around Bakhmut as it is at the moment. Places with windows burnt out and blown out, and then just outright destruction. Explosions in the background. Buildings certainly worse for wear, roofs destroyed, and then, you know, virtually every building has some kind of damage to it, roofing or structural damage. And then just, you know, look at these buildings here. You just think those entire blocks of flats or apartment blocks will have to be probably torn down. Look at everything there, just absolute. Yeah, I don't know that you can make use of those buildings. Would it be? Would so much of Ukraine might have to be just taken down and started again? Burnt and blackened apartment blocks, and this is just a tiny example. There'll be more and worse, and you know, I don't know. Just that's war, isn't it? But I think the reparations, it'll be interesting if and how this finishes. Well, how this finishes at some point, it will, and what will happen to rebuild Ukraine, and who will help to rebuild, and whether Russia would have to play a part in that, or, you know, just don't know how it's going to end. Anyway, that's the end of part one. Thank you so much for your support. Please like, subscribe, share. You can join my channel. There's PayPal, buy me a coffee, all those things if you are inclined and able, and that's hugely appreciated. It takes a lot of time for me to do all this stuff. But thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I hope this was of interest. Please check out part 2 that will come out sometime later.